The paper they put in my hand that morning was a lie, and it had a good man's name waiting at the foot of it. I noticed the lie before I noticed anything else about the room, before the smell of lamp oil, before the controller's polite little cough, before the shutters closed at 10 in the morning on a bright day. That is not a virtue. It is a habit. I have been Clerk-Recorder of the Court of Honor in the Kingdom of Eldermore for 26 years, and my whole trade is words in their exact order. Change one and I hear it the way a farrier hears a cracked shoe on cobbles, 4 streets away, without looking up. The document was headed Deposition of Sergeant Gideon Marr, of the Royal Guard, Ravensmere Gate. It was beautifully written. Court hand, no blots, the capitals feathered the way they teach at the Scrivener's Hall, and it said this: that on the night of the 16th, the deponent was at his post at the Ravensmere Gate, that he heard a carriage in the lantern court, that by reason of the darkness and the distance he did not see who held the reins and cannot say, that he did not see the horses struck up nor the doorkeeper Halloran Peak fall, that he came upon Peak after the fact, that he can name no man. 6 lines, every one of them false. I knew they were false because I had taken Sergeant Marr's real deposition myself, in the guard-house at the Ravensmere Gate, 3 nights earlier with my own pen, on my own paper in the small hours, while a man's blood was still being washed off the stones outside the door. And what Marr had said to me then, slowly, without heat, while I wrote, was not 6 lines. It was 2 pages, and in the middle of it were 11 words that this beautiful copy did not contain. "Master Lyle," said the controller of the household, "you have the fair copy." Ivor Quist was a soft-handed man of 50, with a way of standing very close to your shoulder while he spoke, as though the 2 of you were conspiring against some third party who had just left the room. He had come to the palace in the Queen Consort's train and had risen since like damp in a wall. He kept his nails very clean. "I have a fair copy of something," I said. "I do not know what." "Of the sergeant's statement, tidied." I took the sergeant's statement. "You took a rough, in the dark, in the cold, after a shock." Quist smiled at me with real sympathy, which was the worst thing about him. He could produce it at will, like a conjurer producing an egg. "Men say a great deal in the first hour, Master Lyle, wild things. It is not kind to hold them to it. The household is satisfied that the sergeant in that first hour exceeded what he could truly have seen from where he stood, so we have set it down as it must actually have been. All that remains is his mark." "Then let him make his mark on his own words." "His own words," said Quist gently, "are going to ruin a great many people, and one of them will be him." I looked down at the beautiful lying paper. At the bottom, ruled in a fine hand, was a blank line, and under it, in that same feathered court hand, "Gideon Marr, Sergeant, His Majesty's Royal Guard." They had written his name for him. All he had to do was put his mark above it and make it true. "You may carry it to him," Quist said. "He knows you, he trusts you. It will come better from you than from me." That, I have thought since, was the moment the whole affair was decided. Not in the painted hall a month later with the king on his feet and every candle in the roof shaking, but there, in a shuttered office at 10 in the morning, when a man with clean nails handed me a lie and told me I was the right person to deliver it. I took it. I want that on the record too. I took it, and I walked with it across the palace, and I told myself all the way that I was only carrying paper. Let me set the ground, since a record is worthless without it. Harrowgate is the palace of the royal house of Eldermore, a mile of grey stone, 4 courts, 6 gates, and 800 people who all believe they are the ones holding it up. The royal guard hold the gates. They are the men in the red wool tunics and the tall black bearskins, white gloves, brass, the rifle at the shoulder, the faces that do not move while the realm photographs them. Tourists come to the Ravensmere Gate every summer to shout at them and be ignored. That is the whole of what most people know about the guard, and it is enough, and it is nothing. Sergeant Gideon Marr was 41 years old and had stood those gates for 19 years. His father had been a stonemason in the river quarter, and Marr had that trade in him still. He stood the way a good wall stands, without effort, as if the ground were pleased to have him. I had known him for 11 of those 19 years, in the way a clerk knows a sergeant, which is to say, I had taken his word on 40-odd occasions, and had never once had to go back and check it. Most men, when you write their words down and read them back, want to improve them. Marr never did. He would listen to me read, and if I had it right he would say, "That is it." And if I had it wrong he would say, "No, I said I thought he was drunk. I did not say he was. Put what I said." He was the only witness in 26 years who ever made me weaken a statement against his own interest. Once early on, I asked him why he was so exact. "My father set stone," he said. "A stone set crooked carries crooked all the way up. You don't see it at the second course. You see it at the top, when the whole wall comes over on somebody." He said it without any air of saying something. That was Marr. The night of the 16th of Frost month I was in my rooms above the chancery, asleep, and was woken at 20 minutes past midnight by a runner from the Lord Marshal's office, telling me there had been an incident in the Lantern Court, and the recorder was wanted. The Lantern Court is the small paved yard between the carriage house and the kitchens, where the household's coaches turn. It takes its name from the iron lamp-posts, and at that hour there were 8 of them lit, more light than the place usually gets, because they had brought out every lamp they had. Old Halloran Peak was lying by the mounting block with a groom's coat under his head, and the palace surgeon kneeling on the wet stones beside him. He was alive. I want that established at once, because the record has been mudded since. He was conscious. He was swearing steadily and with great craft, and the surgeon told me within the first minute that the leg was broken in 2 places, and the shoulder was out, but the man would keep. Peak was 68 and had been doorkeeper at the Lantern Court for 41 years. He knew every carriage in Harrowgate by the sound of its axle. Sergeant Marr was standing over him with his bearskin off, the only time I ever saw him uncovered on duty, holding a lantern low so the surgeon could see. His white gloves were ruined. He had used them to make a pad. When the surgeon had what he needed, Marr straightened, put the wrecked gloves in his pocket, took up his lantern and looked at me. "Master Lyle," he said, "you'll want to write." We went into the gatehouse. I had my case. I always have my case. I set out paper, cut a nib, and wrote at the top, "Deposition taken at the Ravensmere gatehouse, 16th of Frost month, 12 minutes before 1 in the morning. Recorder, P. Lyle. Deponent, G. Marr, Sergeant, Royal Guard." And then Gideon Marr told me what he had seen, in order, without a single flourish, and I wrote it down. He had been at his post at the Ravensmere gate, which stands at the head of the passage that runs down into the Lantern Court. 41 paces, he said, he had walked it that morning for a drill, which is why he could give me the number. At 1:15 midnight he heard a carriage come out of the coach-house too fast, the near wheels scraping the cornerstone, and a man laughing. He heard old Peak call out, slow it, you'll have the gate," and heard the whip go. Then he came down the passage, because a carriage moving fast in a walled yard at midnight is a matter for the guard. He came out into the light of the lamps at the moment the carriage swung its turn. He saw the horses shy from the lamp-post, a pair of greys, harnessed wrong, the offside trace slack. He saw the doorkeeper step out to catch the near horse's head, as he had done 10,000 times in 41 years, and he saw the carriage swing wide as the driver hauled the wrong rein, and he saw Peak go down under the sweep of it, and he saw the lamp bracket of the carriage strike the iron post and shear away. And he saw the man at the reins. Here is where I wrote the 11 words. I have them still in my own rough hand, and I have them in the fair record, and I will have them in my head when I am dying. The reins were in the hands of Lord Cassius. I saw his face. I stopped writing. I remember the nib coming up off the paper of its own accord. Lord Cassius was the Queen Consort's son. Not the king's, hers from before, brought into Harrowgate when Morwenna came, and given 4 court offices before he was 25, and known in every cardroom and stable in the capital for a laughing, careless, ungovernable charm that his mother called high spirits, and everybody else called something shorter. "Sergeant," I said. "Master Lyle, you understand what you have just given me?" "I understand what I saw," said Marr. "The 2 are not my business. Read it back." I read it back. He listened with his hands behind him, and at the end he said, "That is it. One thing more, the bracket." "The bracket." "The lamp bracket that came off the carriage when it struck the post. Silver plate about so long." He held his hands a foot apart, with the coach-house tally cut into the underside. "I picked it up off the stones before the grooms trampled the yard. It is in the evidence box in this room, and I have entered it in the night book. Write that I found it and where, and write the number on it, because I would rather you had the number than that anybody had to take my word for the number." I wrote it. He signed it, his own words, his own name, in the square, unhurried hand of a man who had learned to write late and had never got over the seriousness of it. I sanded it, folded it, and carried it back to the chancery through the cold, and lodged it in the night book of the Court of Honor, and copied the essentials into my own waste book. 2 habits, both of them boring. Between them they saved a man's life. Now I have to tell the other half of it, and I would rather not, because I was in the room. The Queen Consort came to the Chancery herself the next afternoon. That never happened. Morwenna did not come to clerks. Clerks were brought to Morwenna. She came in with 2 ladies and Quist and stood among the presses and the tape and the dust, looking around with an expression of pleasant interest, as though she had been shown a well-kept kennel. "Master Lyle," she said, "you were in the Lantern Court." "I was, madam." "A dreadful thing, that poor old man. He has been here longer than any of us." She had a low, warm voice, and she used it beautifully. She was one of those people who make you feel, for the first 30 seconds, that you have been waiting your whole life for their good opinion. "He shall want for nothing. I have already given the order." "That is generous, madam." "It is only right." She let a beat go by. "There is talk that a name was mentioned, in the night, by a guardsman in the shock of it." "There is a deposition, madam. It is lodged." "Of course it is, and it will be looked at soberly by sober men, and they will ask what a man could truly see at midnight at 40 paces, past a shying horse in lamplight." She smiled at me. "My son was at the Ashfold house at cards until 2. There are 5 gentlemen who will say so." I said nothing. It is a large part of my trade. "You are not going to be difficult, Master Lyle," she said, not a question, and not quite a threat, and warm all the way through, "because you are a sensible man, and because there is nothing to be difficult about. Nobody is asking anybody to say a false thing. We are only asking that a man not swear to a thing he cannot know." And then she looked at me a moment longer, and I understood, with a cold sensation in my hands, that she was not there to persuade me at all. She was there to see whether I would need managing. She decided I would not. She was very nearly right. 3 days later Quist put the tidied deposition into my hands, and I carried it across the palace to the Ravensmere gate, and Sergeant Gideon Marr read it through twice in the November light with his rifle grounded and his face perfectly still, and gave it back to me and said, "No." I had prepared a speech. I had prepared it walking, the way you do, and it contained the words sensible and proportion, and no one is asking you to say a false thing asterisk, which I had picked up off the Queen Consort's floor and not even noticed I was carrying. I did not get to make it. He handed me back the paper and said no once, and then took up his rifle and went back to his front, and stood there being photographed by 2 visitors from the coast who had no idea what they were looking at. I stood at his elbow like a fool. "Sergeant," I said at last low, "they will not ask twice." "Then they will not ask twice," said Marr to the air in front of him. "There is a posting attached to it. The Ash Company on the coast. Sergeant Major. Quist will not call it a bargain, he will call it a recognition of long service, and there will be a house with it and a stipend. Marr did not move his eyes. He put it to me yesterday, Master Lyle. A pause. A pair of visitors came close, peered up under the bearskin, laughed, went away. He told me the sea air is very fine at Ashfall. I said I was sure it was, and I said no. The bells over the chapel court struck the half. Marr came to attention with the rest of his line as the relief came up the passage in step, and I stood back against the railing to let them through, and I remember thinking, with a clerk's despair, he does not understand what is going to happen to him. I was wrong about that too. He understood better than anyone. He simply did not think it was an argument. The escalation was neither loud nor fast. That is not how it is done at Harrowgate. It is done the way water gets into stone, patiently and from underneath, and you do not see it until the frost. First, the household discovered that it cared a great deal about Sergeant Marr's record. His record was 19 years long and clean as a plate. So they went looking in the corners of it, and in the corners of any 19-year record there is dust. In his 4th year he had been 3 minutes late to a mount because a woman had fainted at the rail and he had stopped to get her out. A caution. In his 11th year he had cleared the ground under the gate arch around an abandoned bag and stood over it until it was opened and found to be full of onions. An overreaction. He had a note against him for lending a coat. 3 cautions in 19 years. In the ordinary way of the guard, that is a saint's record. Read aloud in the controller's flat voice, however, a pattern of leaving his post, a history of unauthorized action, an established tendency to interpret rather than obey. It was another man entirely. Quist had a copy sent to my office. For the court's information, which is the sort of phrase they use when they are loading a gun in front of you and calling it housekeeping. Second, the household discovered that it cared a great deal about Sergeant Marr's sister. Her name was Ilsa. She was a widow with 2 boys, and she held the tenancy of a cottage and 8 acres at Marrow Down, which is Crown land, on a lease renewed every 7 years since her husband's father's time. It came up that spring. In the ordinary way, the land office would have renewed it in an afternoon, and nobody would ever have heard of it. Instead, the land office wrote to Ilsa Marr to say that the Crown's holdings at Marrow Down were under review as to their best use, and that she should not consider the renewal a certainty, and that she might wish to acquaint herself with her rights, which were, on inspection, none. Nobody threatened her. Nobody mentioned her brother. That is what made it so beautifully done. There was nothing to take hold of, nothing you could say out loud without sounding mad. A lease was under review. Leases are reviewed. And a sergeant of the guard, coming off a night watch, reads a letter from his sister and understands that his refusal has grown legs and walked out of the palace and gone to stand in the doorway of a cottage he grew up in. I went to him about it. I found him in the old armory after the evening mount, cleaning his rifle, which he did the way other men pray. "You have seen the land office letter," I said. "I have." "Sergeant, if you go to Quist tonight and tell him you have reconsidered, that letter turns into another letter tomorrow, and the second letter apologizes for the first, and your sister keeps her cottage, and nobody in the realm is any the worse." The cloth went on down the barrel, slow and even. "Corporal Teal would be the worse," he said. And there, God forgive me, was the piece I had been managing not to look at for a week. Corporal Brannon Teal was 23. He had been in the guard 4 years and had been posted to the carriage house detail, minding the coach house keys and the tally book and the night lamps, because he was steady and dull, and did not mind it. He was engaged to a girl who worked in the palace laundry and had been saving 2 years to marry her, and the whole guardroom knew the sum he had got to, because he wrote it on the inside of his locker door and would not be teased out of it. On the night of the 16th, Corporal Teal had been where he was supposed to be, in the coach house, at the tally book, with the keys on his belt. The household's version of the 16th had a hole in it exactly the shape of a man. If Lord Cassius had not been driving, someone had. The greys had been harnessed badly, with the offside trace slack, which is the kind of thing a hurrying amateur does at midnight when he has been at the wine and does not want to wake a groom. The carriage had come out of the coach-house, and the coach-house had been locked, and the keys had been on Corporal Teal's belt. So the household filled the hole with Teal. The charge, when Quist finally drew it, was a marvel of workmanship, and I had to copy it into the register with my own hand, which is a thing I still dream about. That Corporal Brannon Teal, in breach of standing orders, did take out carriage 4 of the household stable without warrant, that he did drive the same in a state unfit, that by his negligence Halloran Peake, doorkeeper, suffered grievous hurt, that he did thereafter deny the same, dismissal without honor, restitution he could never pay in 3 lifetimes, and a term in the Marshalsea, the household's lock-up under the north wall, where they put men who have disgraced the livery. They took him there to wait for the hearing. He went quietly. He kept saying, all the way across the chapel court, in a bewildered, reasonable voice, that there must be a mistake, because he had been in the coach-house, and the sergeant had *seen. And then somebody told him what the sergeant's deposition said, the tidied one, the one Quist was carrying about in a leather case as though it had been signed, and Teal stopped talking altogether. That was the shape of it. That was the machine. It did not need Marr to lie. It only needed him to say, I cannot be certain, 6 words, no oath broken, nothing false spoken, and the machine would do the rest, and a 23-year-old with a sum written inside his locker door would go under the north wall for 2 years and come out with no trade, no name, and no girl. Marr put the cloth down. He set the rifle in the rack. He looked at it for a while. My father built a bridge once, he said. Not a great one. A footbridge over the Marrow, 3 arches. The contractor wanted him to set the second pier on the old footing because it would save a fortnight. My father said the old footing was rotten and would not carry. The contractor said it had carried 100 years. My father said, then it has been getting ready to fall for 100 years, and it will pick its own day. Did he set it on the old footing? No, it cost him the work, and the winter was hard, and we ate badly. Marr turned around. In the lamplight of the armory he looked exactly as he had looked in the lantern court, with his gloves ruined and his hands full of another man's blood, entirely unremarkable, entirely immovable. The bridge is still there, Master Lyle. My sister's boys fish off it. 2 things happened after that which I did not expect. The first, the guardroom split. Not loudly. The guard do not do anything loudly. But it split, and it split along the line you would expect. There were men, good men, men with children, who thought Marr had lost his reason. He is one sergeant. Cassius is the consort's son. He will be broken, and it will change nothing, and Teal will go under the wall anyway. There were men who said, more quietly, that Marr was right. And there was a middle, which was most of them, which said nothing at all and looked at the floor. And that middle is where every wrong in the history of the world has been allowed to live. Ansel Farrow, who had stood the Ravensmere gate at Marr's shoulder for 6 years, stopped speaking to him, not from malice, from fear. He had a wife and a bad chest and 11 years to his pension, and he could not afford to be seen at a certain elbow, and he knew it, and Marr knew it, and neither of them ever said a word about it. Farrow simply began arriving 3 minutes later and leaving 3 minutes earlier, so that they would not be alone in the changing room. Marr told me months afterwards that this was the worst of it, not the letter about his sister, not the Marshalsea, not the king. The changing room, he said. 19 years, and a man I would have died beside would not look up from his laces. The second thing was Princess Adela. The king's sister was 61 years old, rode at first light in all weathers, and had a way of asking a question that made grown men check whether they had remembered to dress. She had no patience, no small talk, and no fear of anybody living. She had also been at the Lantern Court gate at 12:30 on the night of the 16th, coming in from the stables, and had seen a sergeant of the guard kneeling on wet stone with his bearskin off, holding a lantern for a surgeon. She sent for me on the last day of frost month. Lyle, she said, without preamble, standing at the window with her back to me, you took the deposition. I did, ma'am. Is the boy Teal guilty? Ma'am, the court of honor has not. Master Lyle, she turned round, I have known you since you were a very tall junior clerk with ink on your chin. Is the boy guilty? The whole of my career was a wall between me and the answer, and the wall was 26 years thick, and I heard myself go straight through it. No, ma'am, he is not. Adela looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once briskly, as though I had passed her a tool she had asked for. Good, she said. Then we are going to have a great deal of trouble, and I would rather have it now than at the funeral of somebody's honor. Go away and say nothing. And Lyle, as I reached the door, keep your rough notes, whatever else you do. She understood better than I did what happens in a palace to paper. On the 2nd of cold month, at 7 in the morning, I opened the night book of the court of honor to prepare the bundle for the hearing, and found that the leaf for the 16th of frost month had been taken out. Not torn, taken out, razored down the gutter, close and clean, by somebody who knew books, so that the stitching held and the volume still closed square. You could put your thumb in the join and feel the little ridge of the stub, and that was all there was to feel. Gone with it, the entry of Sergeant Marr's found article, 1 lamp bracket, silver plate sheared, bearing the coach house tally mark and the number of the tally. I went to the evidence press. The box for the 16th was there, the seal was intact, the box was empty. I sat down on a stool in my own strong room, among 26 years of other men's words, sick with a fear I had never had before, not fear of Quist, or of the consort, or of losing my place, but the fear of a man who has spent his whole life believing that if you write a thing down truly, it stays written. Then I went upstairs and unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and took out my waste book. It is a ledger of rough shorthand, my own, invented at 20, illegible to anybody else alive. In it, every working day for 26 years, I set down the essentials of what I have taken, date, hour, deponent, and the load-bearing lines. Clerks are supposed to have exactly one virtue, and it is not brilliance. The entry for the 17th of frost month, 12 minutes before 1 in the morning, ran across a page and a half. It had the 11 words. It had the description of the bracket, and it had the number cut into its underside, which I had copied out of pedantry, because a number written once is a rumor and a number written twice is a fact. C4. Carriage 4, the Queen Consort's own household stable. I put the waste book inside my shirt, and I did not take it out again, not to sleep, not to bathe, not for 11 days. The king sent for Sergeant Marr on the 5th of cold month. I have to be careful here, because this is the part of the record that the realm believes it knows, and the realm is wrong. The broadsheets afterwards made King Alaric a tyrant in a small room, and that is a lie, and a lazy one. I was in the small room. I have the shorthand. Understand what the king was in that winter. He was 58. He had buried Queen Isolde 4 years before, and had never once since been heard to speak her name in public. He had come to the throne late and unexpectedly, and had spent every day of his reign visibly trying to deserve it, which is not the same as enjoying it. He was, by the plain evidence of 20 years of my own records, an honest man, slow, dutiful, easily wounded, and honest. He remembered the names of the men who held his gates. And he was tired in a way that goes past sleep, and he had married a woman clever than he was, who had spent 6 years learning exactly where he was soft, and he was 3 weeks from signing the Accord of Valemore. The one thing he believed his reign would be remembered for, a settlement with the coastal kingdoms that had taken 9 years and had been on the point of collapse 4 times, and which would be signed at Harrowgate in the Painted Hall, in front of 5 foreign delegations on the 28th. Hold all of that in your head at once, because if you drop any of it, you will not understand what he did. They brought Marr up the back stair to the king's private study, a smaller and shabbier room than anybody imagines. A fire, 2 chairs, a desk with a green cloth, and the late Queen's portrait which the king had hung facing the desk, so that he worked under it. Quist was there. The Queen Consort was there, seated a little behind the king's chair, with her hands folded. Crown Prince Rowan stood at the window with his back to the room. And I was there, at the corner of the desk, because the king had ordered that everything said in that room be recorded, which is not the order a tyrant gives. Sergeant Marr came in and stood, and I have never in my life seen a man so exactly where he was. "Sergeant," the king said, "sit down." "I would rather stand, your majesty, by your leave." "As you like." Alaric put his fingers together. "You know why you are here." "I believe I do, sire." "Then I will not waste your time or mine." The king picked up the tidied deposition. Quist had it ready at his elbow, the way a good servant has everything ready, and laid it flat on the green cloth and turned it round so that it faced Marr, and pushed it 2 inches towards him. "This is the household statement of what could have been seen from your post. It does not accuse you of anything. It says that at 40 paces at midnight, past a shying horse, you could not swear to a face. I am told by men who have stood in that passage that this is true. I am told by the surgeon that Peake himself cannot say who was driving. I am told by 5 gentlemen of the Ashfield house that my wife's son was at their table until 2. He stopped. He looked at Marr with something I can only call hope. "I am asking you to put your name to what a reasonable man could not know," the king said. "I am not asking you to say Lord Cassius was elsewhere. I am asking you to say you cannot be certain." And Sergeant Gideon Marr said, "I am certain, sire." The fire moved. Nobody else did. "Sergeant," said the king, "there is a treaty on this desk that 9 years of my life have gone into, and it will be signed in this house in 3 weeks by men who are looking for a reason not to sign it. If it becomes known that the consort's son crippled an old servant in my own courtyard and ran, I will not have a treaty. I will have a scandal, and the coastal kingdoms will go home, and in 5 years there will be ships in the Marrow estuary and boys from Marrow down carrying pikes. I am not asking you to protect a young man I do not even like. I am asking you to hold up a roof." "Sire," said Marr, "I am not able to hold up a roof with a lie. It will not carry." I heard Quist draw breath. I heard, very softly, the Queen Consort's rings touch each other. The king stood up. He was not a big man, but he was the king, and he had been patient for a quarter of an hour, and he had never in his life had to ask twice for anything. "Then hear it as it is," he said. "Not a request. Sergeant Marr, you will sign the household statement. That is my command." There it was, laid on the green cloth between them, like a blade on a table. I want to say, because it is the only part of the affair people ever ask me about, that I saw Gideon Marr hesitate. I did not. I have looked for it in my memory for 20 years, and it is not there. What was there was a kind of grief. He looked at his king the way you look at a wall you have set true and have just seen a crack in. "Your Majesty," he said, "I cannot." "You cannot." "My oath is to serve your Majesty and to keep the peace of the realm and to speak truth in the king's courts." His voice did not rise. It never rose. "2 of those I can do at your command. The 3rd is not yours to give away, sire, not because I withhold it, because it was never mine to lend." "You are a soldier," said the king, and now he was angry, and it was terrible, because it was the anger of a decent man who has been made to hear something true. "A soldier obeys." "A soldier obeys lawful orders, sire, and I would go into fire on your word and think nothing of it. Ask me for my post, my stripes, my medals, my liberty, my life. You have only to say the word and they are yours, and I will not ask you why." Marr's chin came up perhaps a quarter of an inch. "But my name is not the crown's. It is the only thing a man of my rank has to leave behind him. And if I set my name to that paper, sire, then in 10 years, when a clerk in a cold room reads it, it will say that Gideon Marr saw nothing. And Bran and Teal will be under the north wall, and Halloran Peak will be lame in a cottage, and the man who did it will be in this room laughing. And you will know, and I will know, and you will have to look at asterisk or asterisk. And he did not point, but his eyes went for 1/2 of 1 second up to the portrait of Queen Isolde over the desk. Every morning of your life, sire, knowing what your reign was built on. Nobody had ever spoken to Alaric like that, possibly not ever. The king went white. "Get out," he said. "Sire, get asterisk out." Marr saluted perfectly, the salute of 19 years, the salute he had given that man 5,000 times at that gate, turned about and marched out of the room, and the door closed, and the fire ticked, and King Alaric of Eldermore stood at his own desk with his knuckles on the green cloth, breathing like a man who has run a long way. And behind him, very gently, the queen consort said, "My love, he must be made to answer for that in the proper place, not for our sake, for the guards. If a sergeant may say asterisk no asterisk to his king in a closed room, what is a colonel to say in an open field?" The king did not turn round. "Convene the court of honor," he said, "the 19th. He may say it in front of the whole court, and hear what it sounds like." I wrote that down. My hand was not steady and the shorthand is ugly, but I have it. And Morwenna, whose whole design that was, said nothing more at all, because she had got exactly what she came for, and the only thing that can spoil such a moment is a further word. They took him off the gate that night. Suspension from post, pending the finding of the court of honor. It is done in a particular way in the guard, and the way is the punishment. The man is marched into the guardroom at the change, in front of the whole watch, and he lays his rifle on the table, and he unpins his medals and lays them beside it, and he draws off his white gloves and lays them on top, and the sergeant at arms writes his name in the book and rules a line under it. Marr did it without a word. 19 years came off him in about 40 seconds. The medals were 4, the long service, the coronation medal, the Queen's silver struck for Isolde's jubilee given him by her own hand at 29, and a small dark one that nobody in the room but I knew the story of. He had gone into the Marrow in a February flood after 2 boys off a barge, and had got one of them, and had nearly not come out himself, and had never once mentioned it in 11 years of my knowing him. He laid them on the table in a straight line, squared, the way you square anything. Then he drew off the gloves, new ones. The ruined pair were still in his pocket, and I do not think he ever threw them away and put them on top and stood back. Not one man in that room looked at him. Ansel Farrow, at the end of the second rank, was studying the ceiling with the expression of a man who has been struck. They gave Marr a bed in the transit quarters over the laundry, and told him he was not to go within 100 paces of a gate. His sister's letter came the next morning. He showed it to me, which he had never done with anything. Ilse Marr wrote a plain hand and did not waste paper. She had heard, she said, that there was trouble at the palace and that her brother was in the middle of it, and that it had something to do with her lease. She wanted him to know 3 things. First, that the roof at Marrow Down had needed doing for 11 years and she had never had the money for it, so she could not honestly say she would miss it much. Second, that her boys were 15 and 13, and would be in work within the year, and could keep her if it came to that. And third, and she had underlined it twice, hard enough to go through the paper, "If you sign that thing for them to save my cottage, Gideon, I will not have you in my house again. Not for the roof, not for anything. Father would not have. Do not you dare." Marr folded it up and put it inside his tunic, over the ruined gloves, and stood looking out of the little window of the transit quarters at the roofs of a palace. He was not allowed to walk in. "Master Lyle," he said, "I would like to tell you that this makes it easier." "Does it not?" "No," he said. "It only means there is nobody left to blame me. A man can carry a great deal if somebody is angry with him. It is when they are all asterisk behind asterisk you that you feel the weight. The false hope came 4 days later, in the shape of good news, which is how the worst of them come. Halloran Peake woke. He had been in the infirmary at St. Cuthwin's with a fever on the broken leg, and on the 9th of Coldmonth the fever broke and the old man sat up and demanded his pipe, and the whole palace, which had been sourly divided for a fortnight, was briefly and genuinely glad. I went down with the marshal's clerk to take his statement, and Princess Adela came, and Marr was allowed to come as far as the corridor and no further. We asked him what he remembered. He remembered the lamps being lit. He remembered the greys coming out badly harnessed and thinking, some fool has put that offside trace on slack. He remembered stepping out to take the near horse's head. And then nothing, not a face, not a voice, not the whip, nothing until the stones. Master Lyle, he said, gripping my wrist with a hand like a bundle of sticks, I've thought and there's a hole in me. 41 years I've known every carriage in this house by its axle, and I cannot tell you who was up on that box. It's gone. His eyes filled. He had never in his life failed at anything he was paid for. Is it true they've took young Teal? He never in this world. I know, I said. Then say so. Tell them I say he never. You saying he never, said Princess Adela from the foot of the bed very gently, is not evidence, Halloran. It is only love. They will thank you for it and write nothing down. And the old man lay back and understood, and the room got very quiet, and I looked up through the doorway and saw Sergeant Marr standing in the corridor in a borrowed civilian coat, with no rifle and no gloves and no medals, listening. The one hope gone in a morning. Everything now rested on the word of a suspended sergeant with a freshly blackened record, against 5 gentlemen of the Ashfold house, a mother's certainty, a razored nightbook, and an empty evidence box. That evening the Crown Prince came to see him. I did not at the time know how to read it. I do now. Rowan was 34, and he was his father's son in every way that mattered and his father's opposite in every way that did not. Quick where Alaric was slow, easy in a room, popular, and this is the thing people miss about him, decent. He was not Morwenna's creature. He had disliked her from the first week and had never troubled to hide it. But he had spent 9 years working on the Accord of Valemore at his father's shoulder, and he could see the whole board, and he had come to do what clever, decent men on boards do, which is to find the move that costs least. He came alone to the transit quarters and sat down on the end of a strange bed in a room that smelled of hot linen, and he was not grand about it at all. Sergeant, he said, I am going to say something to you, and I want you to hear all of it before you answer. Sir, I believe you. Rowan let that sit. I want that said plainly in front of Master Lyle, so there is no doubt afterwards about what I knew. I believe you saw Cassius on that box. I have believed it since the 2nd day. Marr said nothing. His hands were on his knees. And I am going to ask you to soften it anyway, said the Crown Prince. Not to lie. When the court puts the question, you say, I saw a man. I have an impression of a face. In that light, at that distance, I would not send a man to the wall on my impression. That is true, Sergeant. It is not the whole truth, but there is not one word in it that is false. And here is what it buys. He counted it on his fingers, and every finger was a good thing. The charge against Teal collapses because it rests on the household statement that you saw nothing, and the moment you say you saw a man, the household cannot have him for it. He is released and restored to his rank, and he marries his girl in the spring. Peake gets a pension for life and the lodge at Marrow Down, which I will pay for out of my own purse if I have to. Your sister keeps her cottage. You go back on the gate, and in 18 months you are sergeant major. The accord is signed. And Cassius, a flicker of something ugly and honest crossed Rowan's face. Cassius is sent out of the realm to the coast to rot, and I will have his 4 offices off him inside a year, and he will never sit at a table in this house again while I am alive. He stopped. Everybody is saved, Sergeant, he said quietly. Everybody. And all it costs is one word impression instead of asterisk certainty asterisk. That is the whole price. Tell me where the wickedness is in it, and I will withdraw it and never speak of it again. And I sat in the corner with my case on my knees, and I want to be honest in this record because it is the only thing I have left to be. I wanted him to take it. It was a good offer, made by a good man, and it saved every single person I cared about, and the only thing it broke was so small you would need a glass to see it. Marr sat still for a long time. "Sir," he said at last, "may I ask you a question?" "Ask." "If I say asterisk impression, what happens to the paper?" Rowan frowned. "What paper?" "The court's record. Master Lyle writes down what I say, and it is bound, and it goes into the press, and it stays there." Marr turned his head and looked at me, and I have never wanted less to be looked at. "In 30 years, sir, when everyone in this room is dead, a clerk will take it down and read it. And it will say that on the 16th of Frost month a carriage crippled an old man in the Lantern Court, and no one could say who was driving. That is what it will say. Forever. That is what will be asterisk true asterisk, sir, because it will be the only true thing left." He said it without any anger at all, which made it worse. "You will have saved everybody in the story," said Gideon Marr, "and lost the story." The Crown Prince sat on the end of the bed with his hands hanging between his knees, and said nothing for a long while. "You know they will break you," he said finally. "Yes, sir. You know I cannot stop them. My father has convened the court himself. He is—" Rowan stopped and started again, and his voice was different. "He is ashamed of what he said to you in that room. That is the trouble. He is ashamed, and he is a proud man, and he has put himself where he cannot climb down without every delegation in Eldermore watching him do it. It is his conscience that is going to destroy you, Sergeant, not his cruelty. Do you understand that?" "I do, sir," said Marr. "That is why I am not afraid of the 19th. Rowan looked up. "Because there is a good man on the dais," Marr said, "and a good man cannot listen to the truth for very long and go on doing wrong. He can do it for a week. He cannot do it standing up in his own hall with everybody watching when it is said to his face." He shrugged, very slightly. "So I will say it to his face." The Crown Prince stood and looked down at him, and did something I had never seen a Prince of Eldermore do to a suspended sergeant with no medals on his coat. He put out his hand. Marr got up and took it. "I will be in that court," said Rowan, "and I do not yet know what I am going to do." "That is fair, sir," said Marr. "Neither does he. The night before the 19th, I could not sleep, and I went out into the chapel court at about 2 in the morning, and I found Marr there, in his civilian coat, standing in the cold looking at the Ravensmere gate from 101 paces away. I stood beside him for a while. "Sergeant," I said, "the bracket is gone, the night-book leaf is gone, Peake remembers nothing. 5 gentlemen will swear against you, and they will produce your record and make you sound like a man who has been looking for a reason to disobey for 19 years. I was so afraid for him that I could hardly get it out. You will stand up tomorrow with nothing in your hands at all. Nothing. Do you know what they will do to you?" 2 guardsmen came round the corner of the chapel on their round, and saw who it was, and one of them checked. And then, deliberately in the empty court, at 2 in the morning, with nobody in the world watching, both of them came to attention and saluted a man in a borrowed coat. Then they marched on. Marr watched them out of sight. When he spoke his voice was not quite steady, and it was the only time in the whole affair. "I will not have nothing in my hands, Master Lyle," he said. "I will have the thing itself. The Court of Honor sits in the painted hall, under a ceiling of blue and gold that 4 generations of tourists have cricked their necks at. It sits perhaps twice in a decade, and when it sits, everybody comes. On the 19th of Coldmonth the hall was full an hour before the bell. The whole household was there. The marshal's officers, the chancery, the stables, the kitchens, the laundry, Corporal Teal's girl among them, white to the lips in a borrowed hat. 200 of the guard in a block on the left in full order, red as a wound against the grey stone. The Lord Marshal, Harding Stroud, on the bench with his assessors. Master Ivor Quist at the household's table with his leather case and his clean nails. Lord Cassius in the third row, in a plum coat, with his legs crossed, looking bored in a way that took visible effort. And above, in the gallery, the delegations of 4 coastal kingdoms, who had arrived 9 days early and had declined every diversion Harrowgate could contrive, because they had heard there was to be a hearing. Crown Prince Rowan sat at the king's right hand. Princess Adela sat at his left, very upright, in black. The queen consort sat behind the king's chair, where a consort sits, with her hands folded exactly as she had folded them in the study. And at 10 o'clock the king came in, and we all stood, and King Alaric of Eldermore took his seat on the dais under the arms of his house, and I sat down at the recorder's desk below him with my pen cut and my paper squared and my waistbook inside my shirt, and the thing began. They brought Corporal Brannan Teal in first, from the Marshalsea, and stood him in the rail. He had lost weight. He looked about 19. He found his girl's face in the crowd and then very carefully did not look at it again, because he had decided, I think, that he was not going to disgrace himself, and he had only so much to spend. The charge was read, my charge in my hand in the register. Quist rose and opened the household's case, and he was very good and very brief, and he built it like a man laying brick. The coach-house locked, the keys on Teal's belt, the carriage out, the old man down, the driver fled. The household's regret, its deep regret, that a young man of previously blameless character should have taken a coach out on a cold night after wine and lost his nerve and lied. And then, he said, there was the matter of the guardsman. The household, said Quist, has taken the deposition of Sergeant Gideon Marr of the Ravensmere gate, who was the only man in a position to see the lantern court at the moment of the accident. The household's statement of that deposition is before this court. He held it up, the beautiful paper, the feathered capitals. It records that at 41 paces at midnight, past a shying pair, the sergeant could not identify the driver. The household asks the court to receive it. The Lord Marshal said, Sergeant Marr will be called. And Gideon Marr came up the length of the painted hall. He had been permitted his uniform for the hearing. They could hardly try him in a laundry coat, and it was immaculate, and it was empty, no medals on the breast and his hands bare. He had not been given his gloves back. He came up the aisle between 200 of his own regiment, and nobody in that block moved a muscle, and the sound of his boots on that floor is the loudest thing I have ever heard in my life. He halted, he saluted the dais, he stood. Sergeant, said the Lord Marshal, you have heard the household statement. I have, my lord. Is it your deposition? No, my lord. A stir went along the gallery like wind in wheat. Explain yourself. My deposition was taken by the recorder of this court in the guardhouse at the Ravensmere gate at 12 minutes before 1 on the morning of the 17th. It is 2 pages. That paper is 6 lines. It is not a summary of what I said, my lord. It is the opposite of what I said. I have never seen it before it was carried to me. I have never signed it, and I will not sign it. Quist was on his feet. My lord, the sergeant's original ruff is not in the bundle. No, said Marr. It is not. For the very good reason that a ruff taken in the shock of the hour. It is not in the bundle, said Sergeant Marr, quite levelly over him, to the Lord Marshal, because on the 2nd of this month somebody took a razor to the night book of this court and cut it out, and emptied the evidence press of the article I lodged in it, and I do not know who, and I do not accuse anyone, and I have no proof of anything, and I say it anyway, because it is what happened and this is a court. The painted hall made a sound I have never heard from a room before, a kind of low collective intake, 2,000 square feet of people breathing in at once. The Lord Marshal's face was a wall. You are on dangerous ground, Sergeant. Yes, my lord. And then the king spoke, and everything else in the world stopped. Sergeant Marr, Marr turned to face the dais and came to attention, and I dipped my pen, and I got every word. "Sergeant," said King Alaric, "I am going to give you the chance I gave you in my study, and I am going to give it to you here where you asked to have it, and I will not give it to you a third time." He leaned forward. He looked that morning 70 years old. "The household statement says what a reasonable man could have seen. You are a good soldier. You have stood my gate for 19 years. Affirm the statement. I command you to affirm it." And the whole of the painted hall, the guard, the household, the 4 delegations, the Lord Marshal, the Crown Prince, the Princess, the consort with her folded hands, the boy at the rail, the girl in the borrowed hat, the whole of it turned to look at one sergeant of the Royal Guard, standing barehanded on the blue and gold floor. And Gideon Marr said, "No, Your Majesty. I have written down a great many words in my life." Those 2 nearly took the pen out of my hand. The hall did not gasp. It did something worse. It went absolutely silent, the silence of 200 people who have just watched a man walk off a roof. And in that silence Marr's voice went on, unhurried, not loud, the voice of a man reading a survey. "Sire, I will say the whole of it once, and then Your Majesty may do as you see fit, and I will not complain of it. At 1:15 midnight on the 16th of Frost month, I heard carriage 4 come out of the coach house at speed with the offside trace slack. I came down the passage. I came out under the lamps. There were 8 lit, sire. It was the brightest that yard has been in my 19 years. They had lit them all for the Ashfield party's return. I was at 22 paces when the carriage took the turn, not 41. 41 is the length of the passage, and I was not standing in it. I was standing at the end of it. I saw Halloran Peak step out to take the near horse's head. I saw the driver haul the wrong rein. I saw the old man go down under the swing of the carriage. I saw the lamp bracket strike the iron post and sheer off. And I saw the man on the box, at 22 paces under 8 lamps, with his head turned towards me. It was Lord Cassius. I have known his face for 6 years. I saw it as clearly as I see Your Majesty's now. He looked at me, sire. That is the part I have not been able to put down. He looked straight at me for the length of a breath, and then he took up the whip, and he drove out through the arch, and he left an old man on the stones. There was a crash in the 3rd row. Lord Cassius had got up so fast he had put his chair over. "He's a liar." "Sit *down," said the Lord Marshal, in a voice like a door slamming, and Cassius sat down. "Sire," said Marr, and now for the first time something came into his voice, and it was not defiance. It was something much harder to stand against. It was sorrow. "Your Majesty ordered me to affirm that paper. I have refused a lawful superior, the only one I have ever had, and the only one I have ever wanted, and I know what that costs, and I do not ask to be spared it. But I will tell this court why, and then I have done. I have stood at Your Majesty's gate for 19 years. In that time I have not once been asked what I think. I have been asked to stand still while men spat at me, to stand in rain until I could not feel my hands, and in heat until men fell out of the line, and to say nothing while the realm laughed at me and took my likeness. I have never asked for anything. The guard does not ask. That is the whole of our trade. We hold what we are given to hold, and we do not complain, and we do not explain, and when we are done we are replaced. There is one thing they do not take from us, sire. 1. When a guardsman of Eldermore says a thing happened, it happened. That is not my pride. It is the only working part of me. It is why a woman lost in the crowd comes to us and not to a constable. It is why, when the whole realm is lying to itself, there is still one man at the gate whose word you can put your weight on. If I sign that paper, sire, then a guardsman's word is worth what the household needs it to be worth that week. And every gate in Eldermore is just a man in a red coat, and every gate after mine, for 100 years, is worth less than it was, and no one will ever know why. That is the crooked stone, sire. That is the stone set crooked at the second course, and the wall comes over on somebody at the top. He stopped, he drew a breath. I cannot give your majesty my name for that paper, because it is not mine to give. It belongs to the men who will stand my gate after me. Everything else I have is yours, here." And Sergeant Gideon Marr reached into his tunic and took out a small, flat, ruined bundle, and he stepped forward, and he laid it on the rail of the court. It was a pair of white gloves, stiff, dark, stained black and brown. The stitching burst at one thumb. "These are the gloves I was wearing at the Lantern Court, sire," he said. "I have kept them. They are the king's property. I have no further use for them, and I would rather this court had them than I did." And he stepped back and came to attention, and stood there, no medals, no rifle, no gloves, no rank worth anything by the time the sun set, and waited for his king to destroy him. Nobody moved. I looked up from my page. The only time in 26 years I have taken my eyes off the paper in a live court, and looked at the dais. Morwenna had risen. She had her hand on the back of the king's chair and was leaning down and speaking rapidly and very softly into his ear, and I could not hear one word of it, and did not need to. Her face was perfectly composed, and her knuckles on the chair back were white to the bone. And King Alaric of Eldermore was not listening to her. He was looking at a pair of ruined gloves lying on the rail of his own court of honor, and he had gone the color of the paper under my hand. It was Princess Adela who broke the silence, and she did it without raising her voice, and she did not stand. "Alaric," she said. The king's head turned. "On the morning you were crowned," said his sister, "in the chapel of this house you swore 4 things. I was 9 feet away from you, and I heard all 4. The last of them was that you would cause law and justice, in mercy, to be executed in all your judgments." She let a beat go. "You are in your own court, brother. That man has just paid more for the truth than anyone in this hall will pay for anything as long as they live. Now do it." "Your Majesty," Quist began. "Be quiet, asterisk," said the Lord Marshal. And Crown Prince Rowan stood up. He did it slowly, like a man who has been arguing with himself for a fortnight and has just lost. He came out to the front of the dais and turned so that he was facing his father and the whole hall could see him do it, and he said, in a voice that carried to the gallery, "Sire, 4 days ago I went to Sergeant Marr in the transit quarters and told him I believed him. Master Lyle was present and has it in his book. I offered him a form of words that would have saved everyone in this affair and buried the truth of it, because I thought I was being wise. He refused me. He was right and I was wrong, and I will not sit behind you and let the record say otherwise." He turned to the Lord Marshal. "My lord, I ask the court to note that the Crown Prince of Eldermore believes Sergeant Marr. I do not think the roof came off the painted hall, but something went through that room, a kind of shutter, and along the left-hand side of the hall 200 men of the Royal Guard, who had stood through the whole of it like a wall, moved for the first time, not a word, not a cheer, nothing so gross. They came to attention, all of them, together. It sounded like a single enormous heartbeat in a stone room. The king looked at them. Then he looked at Sergeant Marr, standing alone on the blue and gold floor with his hands empty. And King Alaric did the bravest thing I have ever seen a man do, which was nothing at all for 11 seconds by my count, which I kept, because it is my trade. He stood on his own dais in front of 4 foreign delegations and his household and his court and the treaty of his life, and he did not speak, and he did not save himself, and everybody in that hall watched a king decide. Then he sat down and he said hoarsely, "This court is adjourned for 3 days." "Sire," said the queen consort. "Madam," said Alaric without turning his head, "sit down." She sat down. "Lord Marshal," said the king, "the household statement is withdrawn from the bundle and is not to be received. You will open an inquiry this hour into the removal of a leaf from the night book of this court and the emptying of a sealed evidence press, and you will have the authority of the Crown to enter any room in Harrowgate, mine included." He paused. Corporal Teal is released from the Marshalsea to his own quarters, in his own rank with his pay, pending the finding. If any man in my household so much as looks at him crooked, I will know the reason. And Sergeant Marr. Marr came up half an inch. Sergeant Marr will remain under suspension, said the king, because I gave him a command in this hall, and he refused it in front of the whole realm, and I will not pretend that did not happen. It happened. I am not going to be the kind of king who makes it comfortable for himself by tidying the record. He stood. His voice went suddenly, terribly steady. I have had rather too much tidying of the record. He walked out. We all stood. The doors closed behind him. And 200 men of the Royal Guard, in defiance of every standing order in the book, held their salute until he was gone. The Lord Marshal's inquiry took 2 days and 11 hours, and it turned Harrowgate over the way you turn a stone in a field. I will not put the whole of it here. The essential parts are these. The waste book. I gave evidence on the first morning. I laid my rough ledger on the table and read out my own shorthand, the entry of the 17th of Frost month, the 11 words, the description of the found article, and the tally cut into its underside. C4. 4 assessors and a scrivener from the scrivener's hall examined the ledger, the ink, and the 26 years of daily entries on either side of it, and reported that it was an unaltered working record, kept by a pedant, in a cipher nobody had thought worth stealing. The tally book. Carriage 4 had gone out of the coach house on the night of the 16th. The coach house tally book said so, in Corporal Teal's dull, honest hand, with the time 12:15, and the warrant under which it went, and the name of the person who had demanded it. Teal had written that name down at midnight, exactly as regulations required, and had then been arrested for taking the carriage out himself, and nobody in the household had ever asked to see the book, because the household already knew what had happened. The name in the tally book was Lord Cassius. The bracket. And here is the thing that I still cannot think about without having to put my pen down. On the 17th of Frost month, a silver-plated lamp bracket, sheared at the root, was taken out of a sealed evidence press by a person who had a key, and was carried down to the palace forge, and given to the household farrier, Bead Call, with instructions to melt it and say nothing. Bead Call was 61 and had shod horses at Harrowgate since he was 14 and could not read one word in 100. He took the bracket. He looked at it. He looked at the man who had brought it, a clean-handed man from the controller's office who had never in 6 years come near the forge, and he said, "Aye, sir," and he put it in his apron. And then he did not melt it. He kept it in the apron for 5 weeks, hung the apron on its nail every night, and told nobody. And when the Lord Marshal's men came to the forge on the 2nd day of the inquiry, he took it out, put it on the anvil, and said the only sentence anybody ever recorded from him. It were a queer thing to be asked. They asked him why he had not melted it. He thought about it for a long moment, with the whole inquiry waiting. "Weren't mine," he said. "The gentlemen of the Ashfold house. 5 gentlemen had sworn that Lord Cassius was at their table until 2. Under the Marshal's authority, they were asked to swear it a second time, separately, in 5 rooms on oath, with the penalty read to them first. 4 of them broke inside 20 minutes. The 5th held out until the afternoon. Cassius had left Ashfold at 11, drunk and furious over a card debt, and had gone to the coach house and demanded carriage 4 and driven it himself, because he could not bear to wait for a groom. Lord Cassius. They put it all in front of him at once, the tally book, the bracket, the 4 gentlemen, the waste book, and he was not brave, and he did not last. He wept and blamed the horses and blamed the wine and blamed the lamps, and at the end of it he said the thing that finished his mother, and he said it in a wail, like a boy caught with a broken window. She said it would be dealt with. She said no one would ever. She said it was managed. The Court of Honor reconvened on the 22nd of Cold month, in a hall so full that they opened the west doors, and let people stand in the passage. Corporal Brannan Teal was discharged of every charge, cleared in open court, his rank restored, his 4 weeks in the Marshalsea entered in the register as wrongful, and a sum in compensation ordered out of the household purse. He stood in the rail and heard it and did not move, and then he put his face in his hands, and the girl in the borrowed hat made a noise that everybody in that hall pretended not to have heard. He married her in the spring. Sergeant Marr stood at his shoulder in the chapel. I was there. It was a very good day. Halloran Peake was granted his pension at full pay for life, the lodge at Marrow Down, and at Princess Adela's insistence, and over the objection of the Land Office, the freehold of it, so that no clerk would ever again be able to write a letter about a review. He limped for the rest of his life and lived 11 more years, and was never once heard to speak of it without also mentioning the sergeant who took his bearskin off in the rain. Lord Cassius was arraigned before the King's Bench, the ordinary courts of the realm, in the city, in public. He was stripped of his 4 court offices, ordered to make restitution to Halloran Peake to the last crown he had, sentenced, and put out of the palace. King Alaric did not intervene and was not asked to. When the sentence was read, the king was in his study, working under the portrait of Queen Isolde. Master Iverquist was dismissed the household, charged with the mutilation of a court record, the theft of a lodged article, and the procuring of a false deposition, and answered for all 3 before the bench. He was not a brave man either. He named the person who had told him to do it. And Queen Consort Morwenna was removed from the household council, removed from the regency roll, and required to answer to the King's Bench on the count of procuring, where she said, with great dignity, and I believe entirely truthfully, that she had only ever tried to save her son. The court agreed that this was so. It did not find that it made any difference. Neither in the end did the king. He gave her the great house at Ashfold, and an income and his silence, and he never lived under a roof with her again. The Accord of Valemore was signed on the 28th of Coldmonth in the Painted Hall, on time, by all 5 kingdoms. The delegations, who had come 9 days early hoping to see a scandal, had instead watched a king take a public beating from his own conscience, and then get up and do the right thing in front of them. The head of the largest of them, an old admiral with one eye, said afterwards, "It is in the record, I wrote it, that he had come to Harrowgate to find out whether Eldermore's word could be trusted for 50 years, that he had got his answer on the 19th, and had signed the treaty out of politeness." There remained Sergeant Gideon Marr, who was still, by the king's own order, under suspension. The king settled that himself, at the Guards' parade on the 1st of New Year, in the great forecourt, with the gates open and the public at the railings and half the capital pressed in behind them, because word had got out. He did not make a speech. Alaric was never any good at speeches, and he knew it, and that morning he did not try. He walked out alone across the forecourt to where the ranks were drawn up, stopped in front of one man in the front rank, and took off his hat. The King of Eldermore stood bareheaded in front of a sergeant of his own guard, in the cold, in front of his people. "Sergeant Marr," he said, and they could hear him at the railings. They said afterwards you could hear him in the street. "In my study on the 5th of Coldmonth, I ordered you to sign a paper I had not read closely enough, because I was tired and frightened, and I wanted a difficult thing to be simpler than it was. In my own court on the 19th, I ordered you a second time in front of the realm, because I was ashamed and could not bear to be seen to climb down. You refused me twice. You were right twice. I was wrong twice. I am told that a king should not say such things aloud, and that the dignity of the crown requires me to let this be quietly forgotten. The dignity of the crown is why I am saying it aloud. A crown that cannot be told the truth is a hat." He turned to the sergeant-at-arms, who stood by with a tray, and took from it 4 medals and a pair of white gloves. He pinned the medals back on himself. He was clumsy at it. He pricked his thumb on the long service pin, and I saw him ignore it. Then he put the gloves into Marr's hands. "Yours," he said. "The others are in the chancery in a case with a card. I have written the card myself, and I have not asked anybody to tidy it. And then King Alaric did the thing that the realm remembers, that they put on the coins, that the men at the railings were still telling their grandchildren about when I was an old man with a stick. He founded an office. He turned to the crowd, and he said that from that day there would be in the kingdom of Eldermore an officer of the crown called the attester of the king's word, that no deposition, no statement, no sworn record taken in the royal household would be valid unless it had been read back to the deponent in his hearing and countersigned by the attester's own hand, that the attester could not be dismissed by the household, nor by the council, nor by the consort, but only by the bench, and only for a lie, and that he answered to nobody in the realm, not to the controller, not to the crown prince, not to the king. Because I have learned, said Alaric, that the one thing a king cannot be trusted with is the record of what he has done. And he gave the office to Gideon Marr. Marr stood there in the cold with his gloves in his hands, and for the only time in the whole affair, could not think of anything to say. Sire, he managed at last, I am a stonemason's son. I write slowly. I know, said the king. That is rather the point. Master Lyle will teach you the forms, and you will teach Master Lyle the rest, and between the two of you I expect to be told when I am wrong for the remainder of my reign. He put his hat back on. Do not be gentle about it. He was not. I worked 11 years beside Gideon Marr in the chancery of Eldermore, and he never got quick with a pen, and he never once let a statement go into the press that had not been read back, word by word, to the man who made it. He would sit in a cold room with a frightened kitchen boy or a lying groom or a duke, and he would read it back slowly, and he would say, Is that it? Is that what you said? Because it will be there when you are gone. The attester's countersignature is still required on every deposition taken in that house. They call it the Marr asterisk, a clerk will say. It has not had the Marr yet, and mean that a thing is not yet true enough to be kept. I have one last entry to make, and then I have done. On the 1st of New Year, an hour after the parade, in the chancery, with the fire lit and his gloves on the desk beside him, the new attester of the king's word took the final record of the affair, my fair copy, the whole of it, 206 pages, the deposition and the inquiry and the hearing and every word the king said in the painted hall, tidied by nobody, and he read it through from the first page to the last, slowly, the way he did everything, while I sat opposite him and pretended to be sanding something. Then he took up the pen, and Sergeant Gideon Marr, who in 3 months had been offered a promotion, a house by the sea, a sister's cottage, a boy's freedom, a king's peace, a treaty, and a form of words that would have cost him nothing that anyone could see, and who had refused every single one of them rather than put his name to 6 lines that were not so, signed it. He signed it in that square, unhurried hand of a man who learned to write late and never got over the seriousness of it. It was the first paper in the whole affair he had been able to sign, and I sat and watched him do it, and I did not trust myself to speak, and I have never in 26 years been prouder of my trade, which is only, when all is said, the keeping of what men actually said, against the day when someone needs it. Set the stone true at the second course. The wall goes up a long way after you.